Three cultural elements related to the Arab empires that you need to know about and we need to talk about. Okay, number one, women and women's rights. There is a big misunderstanding about the role of women and where women stand in Arab culture and what influence Islam has on their status. Okay, most of you heard in middle school at some point that women in Saudi Arabia were now permitted to drive, and that was a big step towards equality. Okay, many of you have seen pictures like this one of women wearing niqabs. That's the full garment plus the face covering. And we think, wow, women are forced to dress that way in traditional countries like Iran, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, depending on who's in charge or where they live. But what role Islam has in that is not exactly clear to Westerners. Okay? Women are secluded from mainstream society. They can't go outside of their homes without a male chaperone. That would be a father, if they're unmarried, maybe an older brother, someone that's invested in their security, their purity, or if they're married, it's almost exclusively their husbands. That women's domain is kind of shut away in the household. Westerners don't understand that stuff. So we're going to talk a little bit about fact and fiction. Okay, first of all, the facts. It's true that as Islam spread through Persia and the Middle East, that women's status changed and was reduced. Okay, before Islam, women had the right to own property. They were not excluded or secluded in society. And so Islam did change that. And the fundamental element of determining how women should behave in an Islamic society was the relationship Muhammad had with his wives. And I did say wives, okay? Muhammad had multiple wives. Abu Bakr was the father-in-law of one of his wives. And so the fact that the Prophet had multiple wives, and this was pretty common in the nomadic traditions of the Arab people, traditionally Muslims have allowed multiple marriages. Now I'm going to say more about that in a bit, but that's very different from how things are in the West. Okay? And people look at that and they say, wow, none of that makes sense. So here's my purpose. It's not to tell you what's right and wrong. My purpose is to explain the context that comes from. Okay? So a lot of the context comes from what's written and told about the life of the Prophet and his relationship with his wives. But it's important to note that the Quran and the Prophet teach that women are spiritually equal and socially very significant in Islamic life. Now, the seclusion and the dress. If you see anyone in the West, including in Omaha, in the United States or anywhere in Western culture that's wearing a hijab, and this is a hijab, just the head cover. 99% of the time, women in the West that practice Islam that choose to wear the hijab do so out of their own free will. Purity is an important tenet of Islam. We talked about this before when we talked about prayer, salat. Before prayer, people wash. Spiritual purification, physical cleanliness, the cleanliness of thought, body, and spirit are very important. Part of this purity of the mind is to avoid distractions and temptations. Women take on this garment as a way to be humble. It's not because it looks beautiful. It's not because, oh, this is something, and beautiful in Western standards. I'm not talking about by universal standards, but it's a matter of humility. Just like nuns in the Catholic faith will wear the habit, it's about not caring about earthly things, not creating a physical distraction. In Arab culture, a woman's responsibility involves maintaining spiritual purity. That can cause a problem in some communities because if a man and a woman engage in some kind of unpure activity, the woman is penalized more severely than the man because it was her job to not tempt him. Okay? In religious services at the mosque, women and men are oftentimes in worship in different parts of the mosque to avoid distraction. And if you've ever been to a Sunday service or an Easter service where a person's dress is creeping up their shorts, or maybe you catch somebody's eye across the aisle and you find them to be attractive, that's a distraction. So in Islamic communities, they've created a pretty strong line to separate the sexes in order to focus on what's most important in religious service, which is worship. Okay? In the home, a woman's place is the home, but she is pretty much considered the monarch of the household. She is the ruler of the roost. She makes the decisions. She cares for the family. Major decisions for the household and the children are done by the wife, and the husband really is sensitive to those things and allows for it, or lets that be his wife's domain. I mentioned mixed marriages or multiple marriages. Okay? The separation of the sexes means things are stable and planned in an Islamic household. Someone asked me about eloping, falling in love with somebody and making the quick decision to get married and run off. That is not considered responsible behavior in Arab communities. First of all, a man must provide for his wife and children. So most Arab men, even if they have the opportunity to marry multiple wives, won't, because they financially have to be secure. And how do you make sure a man is going to follow through with his responsibilities and be a good provider for his wife and his children? You have them pay a dowry. Now, to the West, a dowry sounds like something where you're buying a woman, and that's not at all what a dowry is meant to be symbolic of. Okay? What a dowry does, number one, it shows the woman's family that a man will do his part in fulfilling and providing for his wife and kids. Number two, it compensates the woman's family for their loss. The value of that woman, she's not valueless. She has great value to the family. And so to compensate the family for the loss, a groom will pay a dowry to the bride's family. And I'm not just talking just the father-in-law. I'm talking brothers-in-law. I have a friend, white guy like me, who married a woman from Benin, Africa. Okay, Benin is influenced by French colonization and also Islam. And before he married, I shouldn't say before he could, but to do the right thing by her culturally, he saved for 3 years. He went and asked permission of her family, and he received, before he could actually marry Priska, is her name, he got this like Christmas list of things that the men in her family wanted as her dowry, from her father, from her brothers, from his brothers-in-law. So it's what you forget about a diamond ring. I know the whole commercial, a diamond is forever. A dowry is meant to be a significant demonstration of love and commitment. Okay, so most Arab men are not going to marry more than one time unless they're men of means. Now, what about the woman in plural marriages? With the separation of men and women's spheres, in our household, my wife and I share our chores and responsibilities. It takes a team to raise children. It's the hardest job. Forget what men are doing. Raising kids is the hardest job. So, multiple wives would create a community, a nurturing community for children, and supportive community for the woman. That's the viewpoint of communities that still ascribe to these kinds of practices today. Any questions about that? Okay. So there's a lot of misunderstanding about the roles of women, women's rights, why this is practiced this way in Arab or Islamic communities. Hopefully that provides you some answers. The other thing that often is demonized about Islam or the Arab empires is the beginning of African slavery. Now, again, this is not meant to justify something that we see as wrong. Slavery is wrong, but the origins of African slavery is long. Every single civilization we've looked at to this point has had slavery. Mesopotamia, the Greeks, the Romans, even the United States today still has slavery. And if you don't believe me, just Google human trafficking. It's the new term for an old institution. But African slavery, which extends all the way through our country's history up till the Civil War, begins in this time that we're studying. The Umayyad Empire, as it colonizes North Africa, takes advantage of a system of that has been established in Africa. And that is African tribes in competition with one another would enslave their rival. Okay, and as Arab traders come into North Africa, they buy up African slaves and send them out to the rest of the world. Okay, so this system is going to continue from the time of the Umayyad Empire all the way up through the American Civil War in 1860 through 1865. Okay? Just a little origin story there for African slavery. The last thing we need to talk about, and we are coming close on time, we're going to have extra time at the end of this lecture. Math, science, and philosophy. Now, philosophy, we've already given credit to the Greeks. But we know about Greek philosophy because of the Arabs. Arab philosophers like Ibn Rushd, they collected Greek philosophy and they commented on it. So all the documents, the primary sources of Greek and Roman philosophy have pretty much been destroyed, especially by the Dark Ages, as the Ostrogoths and Visigoths and as those Germanic tribes came in and the Dark Ages set. The one place those philosophies were safe were in the Middle East, and we know about them because of the works of Arab philosophers. Number two, if you hate world history and you hate science, you probably like math. And if you don't want to count on your fingers and toes, you want to use numbers on a paper, just like we use the Alpha Roman alphabet, we use the Arab Indian numeric system. Our numbers are based on the numbers, the symbols that were created by the Arab and Indian people back, extending all the way back to 300 AD. And I'll show you examples of that in a second. So if you are someone who takes comfort in numbers, it's thanks to the Middle East. Number three, science. If you hate history and you hate math, but you're a science person, maybe you like astronomy, looking out at the stars. Maybe you're somebody who wonders, how did we ever survive without GPS? The Persians and the Arabs were very important in developing astronomy, the study of the stars, the mapping of the stars. The astrolabe was a device that allowed people to identify where the stars were during different points of the year, which would allow a person to find north and other cardinal directions. It was instrumental in voyaging and engineering. Okay, so this is the last slide with writing on it. I want to show you a couple of pictures. Ibn Rushd. We've got astronomy, and if you're a Bible person, you know that the three wise men from the east that ventured to see the birthplace of Jesus, if that story is true, most likely they were astronomers from the Middle East because that was such an important science to the Persian and Arab communities. The astrolabe, and here, folks, is a mosque that's in Damascus, Syria. Now, I included this because I didn't talk about arabesques. We've done a project on arabesques. We've talked all about architecture and those kinds of things. that Middle Eastern cultures contributed to world architecture and culture. Here are the numbers. On the top, we have Indian numbers from the 3rd century, 300 AD. You can see the number 3 and maybe the 0 starting to creep out of that. Fast forward 600 years, we've got almost all of our numbers identifiable. This is in reverse order: 9, 8, 7, 6. 5 and 4 are going to be the last to change. 3, 2, and 1. Down here we can see, as we get into the 13th century, you guys know who Fibonacci is?
Yes.
Yeah, you guys had to learn Fibonacci sequence. Fibonacci actually makes these numbers, the Arab Indian numbers, famous. So forget about Fibonacci sequence. The next thing that he really contributed was scientists in Europe attached themselves to these symbols. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you've got 2 options for 5. 6, 7, 8, 9. So 5 is the last number to change. You can see a lot of people abandoned the closed 4. Anybody still make their 4s like this, like a triangle? One weirdo. Okay. So most of us make open 4s, which is way too close to the old school 5. So we go 4, 5, and the rest is history. That's it for today. Any questions? Great.